I heard that last year the Earth's surface temperature increased by 1.45 degrees Celsius in comparison to the pre-industrial days. Like, why is that so concerning?
It's slightly arbitrary, but it also isn't.
Okay.
As you go, you get worse and worse impacts. But I actually did a piece recently talking about climate tipping points, which are basically processes that when you set it off, it kind of becomes self perpetuating. And so, for example, the melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. As ice melts, the ice is very light, it reflects sunlight. As it melts, you expose either rock or you lead to ocean water being exposed, which are darker surfaces, which are going to absorb more light. And that creates a warming effect, which then leads to more ice melt, which then leads to more. And so you have some of these effects on the planet, right? There was a study done, I think, in 2022 that looked at 16 climate tipping points. And the good news is, back in 2015, we were projected to warm by about 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 based on current
Oh wow.
trends. Today, that number's down to about 2.7, and that's due to technology and policy advancement over the last 10 years. Just based on current policies, we would drop from 4 to 2.7, which I think is pretty good. I mean, we got to keep going, but that's progress and that shouldn't be understated. And with those tipping points, 14 of them would be crossed at 4 degrees Celsius. Only 7 are crossed at 2.7. So that cuts it in half. But 4 of those 7 would actually be crossed at 1.5. I believe the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, melting of West Antarctica, coral reefs, and one other that isn't fresh in my mind. So there are issues like that that can spiral once you get to 1.5. Granted, that doesn't mean humans are going extinct or it's the end of the world, but it is pretty bad, right? Especially when you
Mm.
have melting ice sheets, sea levels will rise tremendously. A lot of our cities are on coasts, and coral reefs actually act as a barrier on coastlines to protect them from sea level rise. So you want those healthy too. So there are certainly some significant effects to warming by 1.5, and that's why we want to keep it under 1.5. The other thing to know, though, we just because we cross it in 1 year doesn't mean all these things are going to happen. We're talking about crossing it for 5, 10 years and staying above that, the trend line being above 1.5. And even if the trend line does get above 1.5, we can bend it back down by becoming carbon negative in the future by reducing emissions as much as we can, and then planting more trees, getting carbon capture, all these technologies that can suck carbon back out of the atmosphere. So it can pull us back under. So I believe we can stay under 1.5 by 2100. And I believe it's actually economically beneficial if we do, because a lot of these technologies can also create jobs, help us grow our economies, save money. But yeah, that's kind of the task at hand. And that's part of why 1.5 is a key target.
That's
Okay.
really interesting. I'd never heard of those tipping points. That's cool. So what did you say is like the top value that we really shouldn't exceed to not surpass those 16 tipping points?
So the
16 right?
first 4 kick in at 1.5. The next 3 are kind of in the 2 to 2.5 range. And then there were a few around 3 to 3.5. And then I think 4 or 5 around 4 degrees. And then the remaining 2 were a little bit further out. But again, we current policy has us down to 2.7. So I don't even talk past 2.7 anymore, because we would
Mm.
have to reverse policy and reverse course to get worse. And every trend suggests that we're only getting better. So again, 1.5 is a really key goal. I think it's a good goal. But I also don't want to discount the progress we've made over the last decade.
Okay, but crossing 1.5 is still like not good. I mean, you were talking
No,
about 2.7 and further,
it's
but
not
even
good right now, right? You're in Quebec. You saw what
uh,
happened, but
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
but again, the more that we can prevent, the better off we'll be.
So from what I understand, I think it was a good point like you made there that goes against a bit of the fear mongering that's going around because we always hear about, oh, once we cross this point, there's no turning back. It's done. As if we're falling off a cliff, the climate is going to hell. But what you said there was we might cross the 1.5, but if it stays on that course, that's when it's bad. Climate is more of a kind of slow process, a slow burn, no pun intended, but you know, we can reverse it, right?
It really, yes. But like I said, the tipping points are where it gets concerning, right? Because once you kick one of these things in, then you start to see it kind of self-perpetuate. But that doesn't mean it's gonna end the earth. It means it will change in some way that is irreversible for some time. But that doesn't mean we can't prevent a lot of other damage from happening. And in fact, coral reefs, I mentioned that as an example, coral reefs are extremely resilient. We see a lot of bleaching events, but then they bounce back. And again, we don't want to push them past a tipping point where they can't bounce back. But that's one example where, say, things get pushed a little far, but then we pull it back, maybe they can bounce back from it. So, yeah, we know enough science to know these are possibilities, these are likely, but these are all just predicted within degrees of likelihood. It's not this is going to happen once we cross 1.5 degrees Celsius. There's a chance that this will happen at 1.3, there's a chance it'll happen at 1.7, and how exactly it will play out, we don't know, but we know this is a possibility. We know what the consequences of that would be, and we know how to fix it.
Yeah. So last year we reached up to 1.45 degrees increase, and you said that when we get close to that 1.5, there could be some irreversible damage. Do you think we did do some damage last year, and do you think this year we could also have some? Not to freak people out, or
yeah, we've done damage already. I hate to say it, but you saw the wildfires last summer, the hurricanes that have continued. I think 30% of Pakistan got flooded in 2022. There's been some really awful events around the world that climate change has contributed to. So it's here now. When people talk about climate change as a problem for your children or grandchildren, we're past that. It's happening now. Anyone on Earth today has experienced it. Anyone who was born, I think, after 1974 has not experienced a climate that is average for the 20th century. It's been hotter than average since then. So we're living it now, but that doesn't mean we can't make this a lot better. And again, if we warm by 1.7 versus 2.7, that's a hugely better outcome. And that's something where if we pull it down to there, then we keep going and we make it carbon negative and we keep pulling it down to where it's meant to be.
Yeah, we shouldn't just stop at one point and say, oh, this is good enough. No, we should always keep trying to push back.
Yeah. And that's my one thing with the 1.5 is I don't want people to hear I think some headlines even said we crossed 1.5 last year, but it's going to happen in the next 5 years or so where the Earth crosses 1.5 for a year, but there's always blips. We had an El Nino last year, which contributed as well to the warmer surface temperature. And so I don't want people to see a blip one year and say, oh, we're over 1.5, it's over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good that you clarified that. Yeah.
Because, for example, this year, I was going to say, our winter in Quebec especially has been very warm. Very
one of the weirdest winters I've ever seen here. Usually here in Quebec it's very cold, a lot of snow.
Like right now there should be a bunch of snow, but it's dry.
It's just dry. Plus 15 sometimes, it's really crazy.
Yeah. It bounces. I mean, before last year, the hottest year on record was 2016, and that was because there was an El Nino that year.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I think it was like 2020, 2021, and that was when we were in a La Nina, which is supposed to be colder years. So that gives you a sense of how climate change has pushed things. But again, we have that little bit of natural fluctuation as well. So if 1 year crosses 1.5, that doesn't mean the trend line has crossed 1.5. And even if the trend line does cross 1.5, we can bend it back down. So I don't want people to lose faith if we do cross over, but we can't cross over for long, or we shouldn't cross over for long.